The data had been clear. Intercepted transmissions from the primitive world suggested that their mightiest warriors were men, but their women were not behind. Their cultural records showcased champions adorned in leather and metal, brandishing weapons with a skill that rivaled elite Jorvag warlords. There were endless recordings of their battles: Xena, Buffy, Sarah Connor, even the fierce warriors of the so-called WWE, who crushed their enemies in ritual combat before roaring crowds. It had been decided. The first strike would be to neutralize these 20 warriors, to break Earth's will before the full invasion. A tall, reptilian officer approached, his golden insignia gleaming under the warship's dim red lighting. Glargak, Zarknatha's second-in-command, saluted with rigid formality before speaking in a guttural rasp. "Warlord, our strike force has entered Earth's orbit. The targets have been identified and are currently in an unsanctioned communal drinking and bonding ritual. Minimal resistance is expected." Zarknatha's lip curled. Typical. They dull their warrior instincts with fermented poison. Their foolishness will make this all the more effortless. Send in the vicious killers. The squad of elite Jorvag assassins, trained in the arts of silent execution and planetary subjugation, was dispatched with surgical precision. They descended from the warship in sleek, cloaked transport pods, streaking through the night sky toward a small settlement on the planet's surface. The target location was a crude structure labeled Jack's Last Stop, a battered dive bar on the outskirts of a desert town. It reeked of human excess. Inside, the 20 women were anything but the easy prey the Jorvags expected. A cracked jukebox wheezed out an old Lynyrd Skynyrd song as laughter and the clinking of beer bottles filled the smoky air. The women, bound by a sisterhood forged in broken bones and spilled whiskey, occupied the bar like queens of a forgotten kingdom. Some leaned on the counter, trading war stories about ex-lovers and bad bosses, while others played pool with a precision that suggested they could handle a sniper rifle just as well. Big Rhonda, a mountain of a woman with arms thicker than most men's legs, took a long swig of her beer before slamming the bottle down with a thud. "I swear to God, if one more scrawny bastard tries to talk to me about ladylike behavior, I'm going to send him to Jesus with a backhand." Betty Two-Tooth McGraw cackled, revealing the gap in her front teeth that had earned her name. "Ain't that the truth? Last one that tried it, I threw over a pool table. Nearly broke his hip." The air shimmered near the bar's entrance as the cloaking technology of the Jorvag assassins deactivated. The vicious killers materialized 7-foot armored warriors with skull-like helmets and serrated plasma blades humming with lethal energy. They moved with inhuman precision, fanning out in a formation designed for swift executions. For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick and expectant. A Jorvag commander stepped forward, his voice a harsh growl. "You will surrender. Compliance ensures painless subjugation. Resistance results in annihilation." Lisa Malone, a lean woman with sharp eyes and sharper knuckles, lazily took a sip from her beer before setting it down. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with amused disdain, "you just walked into the wrong damn bar." The first Jorvag barely had time to react before Lisa moved. She grabbed a half-empty whiskey bottle and shattered it across the alien's helmet, the jagged glass cutting through exposed wiring. The warrior staggered, and before he could regain his balance, Betty swung a pool cue straight into his gut, doubling him over. The room exploded into chaos. Big Rhonda grabbed a bar stool and swung it like a medieval warhammer, sending one alien flying into the jukebox, which sputtered, sparked, and changed songs mid-sputter to Highway to Hell. The rest of the women leaped into action, their movements fueled by years of fights in places exactly like this, only without extraterrestrial opponents. One of the assassins activated his wrist-mounted plasma blade, lunging for a smaller woman near the back. He never made it. The woman, a wiry ex-Marine named Darla, sidestepped, yanked a cue ball off the table, and cracked it against the side of his head with enough force to dent his helmet. The Jorvags had been trained to combat disciplined warriors, to anticipate tactical maneuvers and regimented battle formations. What they were wholly unprepared for was the sheer, unrelenting, beer-fueled brutality of a bar fight in the American Southwest. Another assassin swung at Lisa, but she ducked and jammed a fork into his exposed neck joint, twisting viciously. Sparks flew. A plasma shot fired wildly, shattering a neon beer sign. One alien reached for his communicator. He never got the chance. A full beer keg, hurled by Rhonda, hit him with the force of a freight train, sending him crashing through the bar's front window. Galactic, watching from a concealed position outside, could barely believe what he was seeing. His elite warriors, trained assassins capable of slaughtering entire battalions, were being dismantled by a gang of human women wielding makeshift weapons and alcohol-fueled aggression. One warrior, desperate, pressed a control panel on his forearm, activating a gravitic suppression field meant to immobilize foes. Rhonda stomped toward him, entirely unfazed. The warrior hesitated, checking his device. The field was active. Gravity should have been pressing them to the floor, unable to move. And yet, Rhonda grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Galactic's stomach dropped as she sneered. "Boy," she said, voice low and dangerous, "I bench press more than your fancy alien tricks before breakfast." With one effortless motion, she slammed him onto a pool table, shattering it in half. The remaining Jorvags, seeing their brethren in various states of unconsciousness, injury, or outright humiliation, turned tail and fled, dragging their wounded back toward their transport pods. The bar's front doors burst open as the last assassin barely made it outside, panting in sheer terror. Galactic wasted no time. He activated his communicator. "Emergency retreat. Repeat, emergency retreat. The humans are." A bottle came hurtling through the doorway and smashed against his face. The last thing he saw before blacking out was big Rhonda standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the neon glow, shaking her head in disappointment. Inside the bar, Lisa dusted off her hands as she surveyed the wreckage. "So, do we just go back to drinking, or is this going to be a regular thing now?" Betty wiped some alien blood off her knuckles. "Well, if they want to keep bringing the party, I ain't going to complain." The jukebox crackled, sputtered, and then, as if to punctuate the madness, played the opening chords of Eye of the Tiger. The women laughed. Up above, aboard the Wrathborn, Zarknath seethed, his fury barely contained as he watched the live feed of his elite soldiers lying in heaps. His jaw clenched so tightly it cracked. So, Earth wanted to fight? Very well. They would burn. And yet, in the deepest corners of his mind, a whisper of doubt slithered through. He had seen war. He had seen death. He had seen entire civilizations kneel before him. But never, not once, had he seen warriors who could dismantle his elite assassins while laughing, drinking, and playing pool. The invasion would continue. But a new thought, foreign and unwelcome, crept into his mind. Had they underestimated these humans? Had they, Jorvag Dominion, slayers of empires, just picked a fight they couldn't win? The Wrathborn loomed in orbit, its engines burning hot with fury and humiliation. Inside its command chamber, Supreme Warlord Zarknath, the Unrelenting, stood still as the battle report flickered across the holographic display before him. The air around him felt heavier, crackling with the restrained violence of a being that had never tasted defeat. He watched, jaw tightening, as the replay of the failed capture mission played out in front of him. Elite warriors reduced to groaning heaps on the floor of a dingy human bar, their sophisticated weapons cast aside like discarded toys. His best assassins had been annihilated not by precision strikes or advanced military tactics, but by blunt force, beer bottles, and an oversized woman who seemed to possess the strength of a planetary war mech. It was unacceptable. Galactic, bruised and still reeling from his escape, stood nervously before the warlord, unsure of how to deliver his next words without losing his head, possibly in a very literal sense. He cleared his throat and chose his words carefully. "Warlord, it is clear that we underestimated the humans. Our intelligence may have been flawed." Zarknath turned slowly, his violet eyes gleaming with cold malice. "Underestimated." His voice was like molten iron, slow and seething. "You mean to say that a group of intoxicated, underdeveloped primates overpowered the most elite force in our empire?" Galactic swallowed hard. Why, yes, warlord. That appears to be the case. The silence stretched so long that for a brief moment, Glargak wondered if he had already died and simply hadn't noticed. But then Zarknath exhaled sharply, turning his gaze back to the hollow display. Then we will not make the same mistake twice. This time, there would be no half measures. This time, the full might of the Dominion would be unleashed. The decision was swift. A reinforced battalion of Jorvag warriors, enhanced, armored, and armed with weapons designed to subjugate entire planets, was mobilized. Their directive was clear: neutralize the human threat, recover the stolen technology, and restore the Dominion's supremacy. The town known as Desert Gulch would be their target. The women who had humiliated them would be their priority. They would land in full force, using gravity suppression bombs, plasma turrets, and atmospheric destabilizers. This would not be another botched assassination. This would be war. The night air in Desert Gulch was still thick with the smell of spilled beer and alien fluids. The Hellstorm sisters had gathered outside the bar, their makeshift weapons still in hand, staring up at the sky. A faint glow on the horizon signaled the return of their would-be conquerors. Betty McGraw spat into the dirt. Well, would you look at that? They're bringing more friends this time. Lisa Malone rolled her shoulders, cracking her neck. Guess they didn't like the welcome party. Big Rhonda stepped forward, arms crossed, her massive frame casting a long shadow in the moonlight. Good. Means we don't have to go looking for M. The town sheriff, a wiry old man named Hank, came jogging up, out of breath and red-faced. Now, ladies, he panted, hands on his knees. I think we all can agree this is a situation. Now, I don't mean to be the voice of reason here, but we got what appears to be an alien army heading our way. And last I checked, you girls only had a few shotguns and some bar stools. Lisa smirked. Don't forget the chains. Rhonda nodded. And the beer keg launcher. Hank threw up his hands. For the love of, how in the hell do you expect to fight off an entire army with bar weapons? The distant rumbling in the sky grew louder. The Hellstorm sisters exchanged glances, then turned back to Hank. Rhonda clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, nearly knocking him over. Because, Hank, she said, grinning, they ain't ready for us. The Jorvag landing craft struck the desert ground like falling meteors, their thrusters kicking up thick clouds of dust, as the reinforced platoons stormed out in perfect formation. Rows of heavily armored warriors stepped onto the battlefield, their glowing visors scanning the town, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Drones hovered above, mapping out their surroundings, locking onto the heat signatures of their targets. Glargak strode forward, his body wrapped in enhanced combat plating, his plasma sword igniting in a brilliant blue arc. His wounds from the last encounter still ached, but the shame burned deeper than the pain. This time, there would be no mistakes. All units in position, a voice crackled in his earpiece. Awaiting command. Glargak raised his arm, signaling the attack. Then the first explosion rocked the battlefield. It wasn't an alien weapon. It wasn't high-tech or advanced. It was a homemade landmine, constructed out of stolen alien grenades and a surplus army tin. It detonated beneath the lead formation, sending half a dozen Jorvag warriors flying in all directions. From the rooftops, Lisa and Betty grinned as they detonated more improvised explosives, sending chaos through the ranks below. A hidden tripwire sent a rolling metal barrel crashing into a group of soldiers, knocking them flat. Plasma fire erupted as the Jorvags fired wildly at unseen enemies. They had expected a slaughter. Instead, they had walked into a goddamn ambush. Rhonda charged forward, wielding a length of heavy chain like a medieval flail. A soldier turned to meet her, but she grabbed him by the throat, lifted him clean off the ground, and slammed him down with enough force to dent his armor. Before another could react, she swung the chain, wrapping it around his legs and yanking him face first into the dirt. Nearby, Betty had hijacked one of the alien plasma turrets and was using it with reckless abandon, laughing as she turned the enemy's own firepower against them. The Jorvag scrambled for cover as bright blue plasma bolts scorched through the battlefield. Lisa took advantage of the chaos, weaving through the skirmish like a ghost, picking off soldiers one by one. A warrior lunged at her, but she ducked low, dodging his blade before kicking his knee in the wrong direction. He screamed as he collapsed, and she followed up with a brutal elbow strike to the helmet, silencing him for good. Darla, ever the strategist, had set up a sniper position atop the water tower. With a stolen alien rifle, she took precise shots at key targets, eliminating high-ranking officers before they could reorganize the troops. Every time Galactic tried to issue an order, a plasma bolt whizzed past his head, forcing him to take cover. It was absolute pandemonium. The battle raged for what felt like hours. The Jorvags, so accustomed to facing terrified and obedient enemies, found themselves outmatched not by technology, but by sheer audacity. The humans didn't fight with precision or structure. They fought like wild animals, relentless and unpredictable. Their weapons were crude, their tactics unorthodox, but they were effective in a way that no military doctrine had ever prepared for. Galactic, battered and furious, called for the retreat. All units, fall back. I repeat, fall back. The surviving Jorvags scrambled to their ships, dragging their wounded behind them. The battle was lost. Again. From the town's edge, the Hellstorm sisters stood victorious, watching as the enemy forces fled like whipped dogs. Rhonda crossed her arms. Think they'll be back? Lisa smirked. I hope so. Betty wiped the dust from her face, picking up a discarded alien rifle. Well, hell. Might as well keep a few souvenirs. Above them, high in orbit, Zarknath watched in stunned silence as his forces retreated in disgrace. His fists clenched, his breath shallow with rage. This was not over. If brute force wouldn't work, then he would escalate. He would call in reinforcements, hire the worst mercenaries the galaxy had to offer. He would turn Earth into a battlefield, so violent that even these mad women wouldn't survive. The humans had made a mistake. They had given him time to prepare. The desert wind carried the scent of scorched metal and victory. The Hellstorm sisters stood atop the remains of a downed Jorvag cruiser, surveying the battlefield with the satisfaction of a job well done. Smoke curled into the sky, where the last of the alien forces had fled in disgrace. All around them, discarded weapons and abandoned armor told the same story. The invaders had underestimated Earth, and now they were licking their wounds. Lisa Malone ran her fingers over the sleek surface of an alien rifle, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Well, ladies, I think we just upgraded from shotguns and barstools. Betty McGraw hoisted a plasma cannon over her shoulder, grinning. Damn right. Who knew intergalactic war came with party favors? Rhonda stomped over, arms crossed, her presence as commanding as ever. We sent 'em running, but they'll be back. That big purple bastard in charge ain't gonna take 2 ass-whoopings and just call it quits. A rusted pickup truck rumbled up the dirt road, kicking up dust as Sheriff Hank pulled to a stop. He climbed out with the stiff movements of a man whose nerves had been thoroughly shot. You ladies care to tell me why the whole damn sky lit up like the 4th of July? Lisa smirked. Aliens. Again. Hank pinched the bridge of his nose. I ain't even gonna ask. The realization of what they had done was settling in. They hadn't just defended their town. They had waged war against an advanced extraterrestrial military and won, twice. The Jorvags wouldn't make the same mistake again. Next time, they'd bring everything they had. And that meant the Hellstorm sisters had to hit first. The decision wasn't made lightly. These were women who had lived through the worst Earth had to offer. Wars, heartbreak, bar fights that left permanent scars. They had survived because they didn't back down, because they met every challenge head-on. And now the battlefield wasn't just their town. It was the stars themselves. With the wreckage of several downed ships at their disposal, it didn't take long before they started piecing together a plan. Dale, a retired Air Force mechanic with a drinking problem and a genius for making things work that shouldn't, took one look at the alien tech and let out a low whistle. Well, hell, looks like y'all just got yourself a space program. They worked tirelessly, scavenging what they needed, fusing alien metal with human ingenuity. Engines were rebuilt, weapons were modified, and soon a fleet began to take shape. It wasn't pretty, more Mad Max than Star Wars, but it was functional. And it was deadly. Lisa sat in the cockpit of one of their modified ships, running her fingers over the control panel. "Ain't this something?" she muttered. "Last week, we were drinking beer and shooting pool. Now we're taking the fight to an alien empire." Betty climbed into the seat beside her, grinning. "Always wanted to see the stars. Didn't think I'd be doing it in a stolen warship." Rhonda's voice crackled over the radio. "Quit your yapping and fire up them engines. Time to pay the Purple Boys a visit." As the ships roared to life, a thrill ran through them. They had always been a force to be reckoned with, but now they had the means to prove it on a much bigger stage. The sky wasn't the limit anymore. It was just the beginning. The Jorvag Dominion was about to find out what happened when you pissed off the wrong women. Deep in the heart of Jorvag Prime, Supreme Warlord Zarknath stood before a massive holoscreen, his fingers digging into the metal railing as he watched the preparations unfold. His war council stood behind him, silent, knowing better than to speak when their leader's fury was barely contained. "The humans," he growled, voice like grinding stone, "are not merely a nuisance. They are a threat." Glargak, still bruised from his last encounter with them, shifted uncomfortably. "Warlord, we have called upon every mercenary and warlord available. Our fleet is being reinforced as we speak." Zarknath didn't turn. His eyes remained locked on the screen, where dozens of warships assembled in orbit. "It won't be enough." The council exchanged uneasy glances. It was unlike him to express doubt. The Jorvags had conquered entire systems, crushed civilizations that had stood for centuries. But these humans, they didn't fight like anything he had encountered before. They didn't break. They didn't surrender. They laughed as they destroyed his forces. That was what unnerved him the most. They enjoyed the fight. A sudden alarm blared through the chamber. Zarknath's eyes narrowed. "Report." A trembling officer appeared on screen, his face pale. "Warlord, we have an incoming fleet. Unknown configuration. They're broadcasting a message." Zarknath's jaw tightened. "Put it through." The holoscreen flickered, then resolved into an image of Lisa Malone, sitting in the captain's chair of a modified Jorvag battleship, a smug grin on her face. A cigarette hung from the corner of her mouth as she leaned forward. "Hey there, boys. Miss us?" For a long moment, there was silence. Then chaos erupted. Tactical officers shouted over one another, scrambling to analyze the incoming fleet. The War Council descended into murmurs of disbelief. Zarknath stood frozen, staring at the screen, barely able to comprehend what he was seeing. The humans hadn't waited. They hadn't licked their wounds or begged for mercy. They had come for him. Lisa took a slow drag from her cigarette, exhaling smoke as she gestured lazily to someone off-screen. "Go ahead, Betty. Let 'em know we're serious." A second feed appeared, showing the Hellstorm sisters aboard their captured ships. They weren't alone. A small army of human mercenaries, ex-soldiers, and thrill-seekers had joined them, drawn by the promise of action and glory. And, of course, the promise of looting an entire empire's worth of alien tech. Betty, grinning ear to ear, pressed a button. A massive explosion bloomed in the distance as one of Jorvag Prime's defense stations went up in flames. Lisa leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "So we gonna do this the easy way or the fun way?" Zarknath's grip on the railing tightened until the metal groaned under the pressure. His worst fears had been realized. The humans were not prey. They were predators. For the first time in his reign, he felt something he had never known before: doubt. But it was quickly buried beneath rage. He would not allow his empire to fall to a handful of wild, undisciplined barbarians. He would meet them head-on, with everything he had. With a sharp gesture, he turned to his officers. "All ships to battle stations. Deploy every available unit. If these humans want war, then by the void, we will give it to them." The order sent the entire planet into a frenzy of movement. Warships powered up their cannons. Fighters scrambled into formation. Planetary defenses locked onto the incoming fleet. The battle for Jorvag Prime had begun. As Lisa's fleet surged forward, Rhonda's voice came through the comms. "You know, I'm thinking we ought to carve our names into their damn moon when this is over." Betty chuckled. Hell, let's take the moon. Lisa grinned. First things first, ladies. We got an empire to topple. The first shots were fired, and the void exploded into chaos. The Hellstorm sisters had come to make history, and the galaxy would never be the same. The once mighty Jorvag Prime burned, its skies filled with the wreckage of warships, its proud spires crumbling into ruin. The Hellstorm sisters had carved a path of destruction through the heart of the Empire, and now, standing atop the Grand Palace's shattered balcony, Lisa Malone surveyed the wreckage with a slow, satisfied smirk. Smoke coiled through the air, the acrid scent of scorched metal and ozone thick in her nostrils. Below, the remnants of the Jorvag forces were kneeling, hands raised, surrendering to a handful of humans who, only days ago, had been bar-hopping bikers with no real ambition beyond their next fight. And now, they had toppled an empire. Betty McGraw leaned against a cracked pillar, still gripping an alien plasma rifle like it was an old hunting shotgun. Her lip was split, and one of her knuckles was bleeding, but she wore her bruises like trophies. Hell, Lisa, she muttered, nudging a battered helmet with the toe of her boot. Think they finally got the message? Lisa took a long drag from her cigarette, exhaling smoke as she glanced down at the trembling warlords who had once ruled entire systems. I sure hope so, she said, flicking the cigarette away. Hate to have to do this twice. A deep groan echoed from the rubble below, and then, with a heave of displaced stone, Zarknath the Unrelenting rose. His once imposing armor was scorched, half-melted, the proud insignia of his dominion barely recognizable beneath the charred blackness. He staggered forward, his forearms trembling as he clutched at a jagged piece of debris to steady himself. The warlord had never looked more pathetic. Rhonda stepped forward, the ground shaking beneath her massive boots. She rolled her shoulders, cracking her neck with a grin that promised pain. So, she said, flexing her fingers, we doing this the hard way or the real hard way? Zarknath's breath came in ragged gasps. His once burning violet eyes flickered to the ruins of his fleet, his empire, everything he had built, shattered by a handful of humans who fought without fear, who reveled in the chaos he had tried to unleash upon them. He was Zarknath the Unrelenting, conqueror of 1,000 worlds. He was not meant to lose. And yet, here he was. His fingers twitched toward the small, concealed device on his belt, a last resort, a failsafe that would call the remnants of his scattered fleet to bombard the entire planet. If he could not rule it, he would ensure no one else did. Lisa saw the movement before he even had a chance to react. In a blur, she drew the alien sidearm from her belt and fired. The shot struck true, vaporizing the device in an instant, leaving nothing but a smoking crater where his last hope had been. Zarknath's gaze snapped up to hers, his breathing ragged, fury warring with disbelief. You don't understand what you've done, he rasped. You've disrupted the balance. You think you won? The Dominion is vast. Others will come. Others will. Lisa stepped forward, pressing the barrel of her gun against his forehead. Let M. There was no grand speech, no monologue, just the pull of a trigger. Zarknath, the Unrelenting, crumpled, his body hitting the scorched marble with a final, hollow thud. The warlord of the Jorvag Dominion was no more. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Betty let out a low whistle. Well, hell, that's that, I guess. Rhonda crossed her arms. Damn shame. Kinda thought he'd put up more of a fight. Lisa holstered her weapon and turned back toward the battlefield. The Jorvag forces that remained, officers, warriors, those too wounded or too cowardly to have fought until the bitter end, stared up at them, awaiting judgment. Darla, perched on a nearby ledge with a sniper rifle still cradled in her arms, spat over the side. So what do we do with them? Lisa let out a slow breath. They got two choices. They bend the knee, or they get the same treatment their boss just got. For a beat, no one moved. Then, as if a dam had broken, the Jorvag survivors fell to their knees in waves, their heads bowed, their weapons discarded. The Hellstorm sisters had won. The galaxy just didn't know it yet. Word spread like wildfire. The invincible Jorvag Dominion had fallen, not to an armada or a rival empire, but to a ragtag group of human women who had, by all accounts, walked into the heart of enemy territory and beat the ever-loving hell out of everything in their path. On distant worlds, the news was met with shock, disbelief, and in some cases, outright panic. Bounty hunters, warlords, mercenaries, they all scrambled to make sense of what had happened. The mighty Jorvag had been crushed by creatures that had, until now, been little more than an afterthought. And worse, there was now an empty throne. The Hellstorm sisters, whether they liked it or not, had just inherited an empire. Lisa sat in what had once been Zarknatha's war chamber, her feet propped up on the massive stone table, a bottle of stolen alien liquor in one hand. The room, once a place of conquest and terror, now looked more like an impromptu party spot. Empty bottles, discarded helmets, and battle-worn weapons littered the floor. Betty was sprawled across a lavish chair that had probably once belonged to a high-ranking general, while Rhonda had claimed the warlord's throne as her own, though it barely contained her. Lisa took a sip of the burning blue liquid in her hand and exhaled slowly. "So, we run in this place now." Betty grinned. "Looks that way." Rhonda shrugged. "Guess that makes us queens of the damn galaxy." Lisa considered that for a moment, rolling the idea over in her mind. She had spent her whole life looking for the next thrill, the next fight. And now she had something even better, a whole damn empire at her feet. "Well," she said, raising her bottle, "guess we better make it official." The others raised their drinks, and in that moment, the fate of the galaxy was sealed. The Hellstorm Empire was born. In the weeks that followed, their reputation only grew. Some planets, desperate for freedom, pledged themselves to the new rulers without hesitation. Others, foolish enough to resist, learned firsthand why the women of Earth were not to be underestimated. Mercenaries who had once hunted them now sought their favor, offering their services to the highest bidder. Lisa, Rhonda, Betty, and the rest of the Hellstorm sisters had gone from outlaws to warlords to something even more dangerous, legends. And yet, even as they reveled in their victory, they knew the galaxy wouldn't stay quiet for long. Somewhere out there, in the endless expanse of space, enemies were plotting, alliances were shifting, and new threats were beginning to stir.